Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is April 12th, 2024. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Also want to thank John Gordon for introducing me to today's guest, Robert M. Scotto. Is that right, Robert Scotto?
That's correct.
Where in the heck are you calling in from, Robert?
New York.
First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
The best thing uh, at my age, it is to wake up in the morning and say, I'm alive, I'm healthy, and that's about all I need to carry on for the rest of the day. Yeah, health and not even wealth, just being healthy.
Healthy is a great thing. I agree with you 100%. And I love Louis Buñuel said, "Long live the living."
Right. Life is for the living. I think that's from Beckett.
Wow, life is for the living. Um, what's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Oh, I've always been a book person.
Yeah.
Absolutely, all my life. Still to this day, although I do have Kindle and do read online, it's still books.
Did you become a reader, Robert? One, because your parents told you to. Two, they did as an example, or three, on your own.
On my own, my parents were immigrants, and my father and my grandmother, who lived with us, did never spoke English. So I had to learn to read on my own. And from the very earliest time, I was essentially, uh, except for school, self-educated because my parents were not able to help me. They're wonderful. They did a fabulous job of taking care of the necessities, but as far as language acquisition, no. However, if you got a second, I have an amusing story. I'm one of the few people I know who got thrown out of kindergarten. And the reason is that I did not know until a year or two later, after kindergarten, the difference between Italian and English words. So my my sentences, my communications were all somewhat garbled to the rest of the world. And I just went ahead and did what I wanted. And the teacher said, you can't do that. You're not allowed to stand on the desk and sing Old Man River if that's what if that's what comes into your mind. I never encountered any kind of obstruction in acquiring knowledge. So I had to learn the rules.
Well, that's funny. It sounds like you were almost talking Finneganese there. You were blending.
From the very beginning, yes.
Yeah. So, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Why do they collect or gather? Well, okay. First of all, uh, I consider myself an evolutionary atheist, and I believe that from the very beginning, uh, old people were preserved because of the information that they had, not because they were of any real physical use to the tribe. I mean, old ladies were buried long after they were able to bear children because they were the reservoirs of cult knowledge of plants and geography. So from the very beginning, long before it was written down, information was treasured enough to have people preserve their lives.
Beautiful. You anticipated a question I'm going to go into about archiving coming up, but just to follow up on that, is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
Oh, well, again, evolutionarily, it came about because you were able to survive better if you had access to this information. So I can't say it may become, it's like memes. It may now be innate, but originally it was purely environmental.
Do do thoughts create emotions?
For me, yes, no question. as do notes in music. Abstract things can definitely fuel your emotional life. No
Yeah.
question about it.
Fill in the blank, Robert. I don't know what I think until I.
I was going to say until I eat. No,
Oh, that's a good answer. I never had that answer. Until I eat.
no,
It's,
I, I don't know what I think. I guess if we're talking about something situational rather than scholarly, I would say until I review the possibilities, or if it had to do with my profession, it would never speak until you've done all your research.
yeah. Review possibilities. Really good answer. Both of them are really unique. Eat and review possibilities. McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. Can humans think without language?
This is one of the oldest arguments I've had with people. I don't think so. I think you need language in order to think.
Yeah.
I know that there are a number of people who, including neuroscientists, who think that the brain is capable of abstraction and without the need for language. But my problem with that is, if I were to abstract a concept, how do I communicate this? There's only one way I can communicate. It's with language. So somehow that concept or idea is idealized by language.
Yeah. Well, Chomsky says the language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Oh, well, try raising children. having raised children, I would say that you're forced. You're forced to find a way to communicate, first of all, before they acquire language by other means. But once they acquire language, I forced myself to find a way to make my idea clear to them
Yeah.
in the universe that they inhabit. And I think, as someone who taught language, I wasn't very good at teaching writing, but I think I was pretty good at teaching analysis of writing. Uh, you you have to find a medium through which a communication can occur, even if that means you have to, in some cases where when I was a child, talking in two languages at the same time
Yeah.
with my parents. So I, I'm just, to me, it's an accommodation that language permits, and that other forms of communication do not. I don't think. Uh,
Yeah.
I can see physical problems in doing sign language, again with children, or what I, I don't know how you think abstractly without language. So it would
Yeah.
have to be, you have to accommodate the person's level of language.
Very good. Your observations of humans in general, are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
uh, I have no doubt that we're more feeling beings, and I think the world would be a lot better if we were more thinking beings. Yeah, yeah. Again, the level, when I don't want to sound presumptuous, but the level of education that people have normally is reflected by the way they respond to nuance. And in politics in particular, people do not respond to nuance. That's just one. They respond to a gut emotion, or an issue that's of moment to them, but don't really consider the entire situation. I don't know how far you want me to get into this, but I argue with my family, who have turned into what I consider suburban Republicans, because they are only interested in one or two issues when it comes to electoral politics, and don't consider the well-being of the state of the country, the nature of accommodation, again, with those who don't think the way you do, and don't live where you live. So, to answer your question, I would say we should think more and feel less when it comes to making decisions.
Really good, Robert. I'm curious if you would respond to this word. I mean, suss out this word, the level and how to respond to nuance. What's another word? And by the way, I welcome anecdotes, stories, going
Okay.
off on tangents, always, always. But when you said how to respond to nuance, what is another word for nuance, or suss out what you meant by nuance?
Uh, Complexity.
Okay.
Uh, uh, that if you take any political issue, any hot political issue, it obviously has more than two sides.
Yeah.
And you think of abortion or the budget or welfare, Medicare, anything. There are always many, many sides to the position, and unless you're capable of at least trying to deal with as many sides as possible, I don't consider you uh, uh, expert enough to make that decision. So,
Yeah.
uh, and that what I meant earlier is that people simply respond to the hot button issues in an emotional way. Say, "I'll never vote for anyone who's anti-abortion." Well, never. And
Yeah.
is anti-abortion the only thing that you
Yeah.
judge a candidate on? That's what I meant by nuance.
Got it. Really well sussed out. Thank you. Two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
I don't believe in the soul.
Two, the second Turing question is, can machines think?
Yes, I think uh, if okay, you know that there are several different ways of thinking about consciousness, which is the big thing with uh, 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 today. Can a machine be conscious? Is a different question than if it can a machine think. A machine can think clearly in many ways, in a superior way to human beings. They're faster, they're more accurate in any kind of mathematical or historical situation. But do they have a consciousness? No.
Yeah.
That to me is the big distinction.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
I, I wonder, can you detect consciousness in anybody else? I know, for instance, my wife is conscious, my children are conscious. I know that, but I don't think we can detect it. We know we are conscious, and we assume by analogy that any other thinking, feeling person is conscious too. So I would answer that it's something that you is internal rather than external.
Yeah. It's good because it's me and you versus the wording on the question. So I love when you are open to shifting the wording of my question, the verbs, the nouns. Do
Mhm.
you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Meaning?
Yeah.
Oh, happiness for sure. I mean, as the answer again is a little nuanced. At one point, I'm sure my answer would have been meaning when I was younger and I was going into a professional career and making choices along the way. But at this point in time, I think everything that I've accumulated ought to at least make me happy or provide the material for my happiness. So as I told you earlier, when I wake up in the morning and I look around and see that I'm still conscious and that I'm healthy, that to me is as close to happiness as I could ever want. It means I'll be able to go on for this day and do what I want to do.
You know, I got it from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning book. He says happiness doesn't tend to last, and meaning does tend to last.
Oh, I agree totally.
Yeah.
Which is, by the way, why seeking happiness is so important. You don't know how long you're going to get it or how
Yeah.
long it's going to last. Yeah, meaning, if again, by meaning, if you think like the meaning of life or the purpose of life or the end of what you're doing, yeah, that's in the long run much more important. But happiness, how do you achieve meaning if you're unhappy?
Yeah.
I mean, it almost, they almost cancel each other out.
Yeah. Very good. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oh, speed of light. They measured the speed of thought. It's not nearly as fast as the speed of light.
The poet Audre Lorde said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer responded and said, "You can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?"
Can you tell me what you mean by master's house? You mean
you're answering the question with the question. This is good. It's all about inventing new questions and metaphors.
Right.
Basically, Robert, it's you put the questions in the context you want. So just suss it out as the basic question is, what tool do you gravitate towards? You can put the word new in front of it if you want, and you can apply it to Audre Lorde's. She's a poet, so she might be talking about the master's house as someone like Frank Zappa said, who are the brain police? Is it someone inside you, or is it some corporate consumer culture? So defining what the master's house is up to you and whether you want to apply it. The basic question is, what tool do you gravitate towards?
Okay. Audre Lorde was a Black woman.
Yeah.
And the master's house, coming from a Black woman, whether she's a poet or not, I would have to assume that this would the master's house would be a metaphor for the white establishment that has kept Black people carefully controlled through time. And the only way I think she's right. The only way to get that done is to use the tools that the master used to subdue you, to correct him, which is why it is so important to me for the legalization of ideas and not just the. Let me give you one analogy. My wife is absolutely consumed by recycling and all of the other means of eliminating plastics. And and I said to her, this is terrific, but we live in Manhattan where the odds of recycling because of population density are very slim unless you're forced to do it. Unless there is a government saying you must recycle and here are the ways to do it. We'll provide you with the means to do it. The same thing is true with anything having to do with racial or ethnic or discrimination of any kind. It has to be set in law in order for it to have some kind of teeth.
Yeah, it's really interesting. My friend's dad helped invent recycling kind of when it became a craze. And he basically said it doesn't work. But, you put a bunch of plastic, you put a bunch of grass together, it's better. But anyways, the feeling is that we're helping save Mother Nature by separating our garbage. So blah blah blah. I understand your wife's concerns, and that's probably in the long run good. What new toy do you suggest?
Toy?
Yeah.
Uh, Whew. What toy do I suggest? Can I ruminate on that for a while?
Indeed. Ruminate. And what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Oh, will I wake up in the morning? I'm 82 years old. B, how are my children and grandchildren doing?
Yeah.
Last I heard, this was happening and this was due and so on. And 3, because I have very few other concerns at this point in my life, what's the weather going to be like tomorrow?
There you go. Very basic. Thank you. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Robert, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, that's a two-part question, and let me. The first part is, why do we ignore them? Because in Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, which is a fabulous work, everybody should read it. The underground man, who's a very unlikable person, very nasty, selfish, self-indulgent, he says one thing that I think is to me invaluable. It isn't that people are good or bad, white or black, liberal or conservative, Christian or Muslim or Jew. It's that people are basically selfish. The reason why most bad things happen is that people selfishly take the information and use it for their own ends rather than seeing what the implication of that is on a broader scale. In terms of empowering government officials. Do you vote for someone? I'm returning to this because it bothers me so much. Do you vote for someone because he's for this particular thing? Or do you vote for someone because his broad agenda is better for the country than
Yeah.
that other person? And
Yeah.
That to me is the key. Selfishness.
Yeah. It's really good. Really well put there. I appreciate what you just said. Do artists have moral obligation?
The art for art's sakes, people would say no, but in the broad sense, yes, they do. Did, did you have a liberal arts education? I'm asking not because,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
the fundamental principle, one of the fundamental principles of a liberal arts education, was that being better informed and knowing more should make you a better person. And by better, it means more than just able to write better poems. It also means able to address what other people are responding to and understanding by what you're saying. So, in a very broad sense, not in any particular sense, artists do have a kind of a moral obligation to produce something that will better the world rather than make it worse. Now, they could argue, well, if I depict this absolutely evil person, what I've done is I've located for you something to avoid or
Yeah.
something to rub out. True. In that sense, sure, that works. But art for art's sake often is an excuse for creating an opaque incomprehensibility that disguises a lack of moral purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, again, you touched on a lot of what we study. McLuhan really probed this thing called comprehensive awareness.
Hmm.
You study patterns and you get a big picture view. And saying understanding is not having a point of view, understanding is getting the big picture. In your own lonely room, you can say, I love her, I hate this. But in the big picture, if you study the patterns of how this shapes our behavior. So here's a distinction he made, and I'm curious your thoughts. Everybody experiences far more than they understand, yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior. Now, the way I discuss this could be wrong, but I think he might be saying if the kid comes in from the cold, the parent goes, don't touch the stove, they'll burn your hand. That's experience. The parent could say, I'm going to teach you the dynamics of heat. You can get your hand really close to the stove, rub them together, and get your hands warm. That's understanding. So is he saying that we have our behavior is shaped more by experience when it should be more shaped by understanding?
Yeah, I think that's what he said. Uh, One of the problems with experience is, I think it's been shown again and again, we are so bombarded by experience, by impressions, by data, whatever, that it's virtually impossible to put it all together in a meaningful way, except by trying to convert it into a universal form, a poem, an essay,
Yeah.
a painting, a string quartet, whatever. So, yes, the ideal that you aspire to is to comprehend this myriad expression of the world, but it's very difficult to do because there is so much. And nowadays, with the internet and other
Yeah.
forms of information, it, it's a very difficult job to understand all of the things that you experience, and that's why experience for most people is more primal and far more of a motivation than understanding. It's similar to what I said before about people being very narrow in their response to very complex situations. It's safer to say I like this guy than to examine everything he stands for.
Yeah, Robert, that's good because it's what I often say, learn that Finnegan's Wake satirized information overload that we live in. We're swirling in this information overload. In fact, T.S. Eliot said, we had the experience but missed the meaning.
Mm-hmm.
We're overloaded, but we missed the meaning. So here's another Turing comment that brings in this word experience. And I'm curious your thoughts. Turing said, what we want is a machine that can learn from experience. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on that Turing line. And is he saying we, meaning the highbrow computer thinkers, or is he meaning we, humanity in general?
I would say, based on the context of the remark, he means humanity. He means human beings would be better off if machines could think, uh, which is to some extent is true. I mean, just think for a second of what our life would be like without computers, without a means to put together information and assemble it so that we could evaluate it. It's the evaluation, the summation that makes us human, and I don't think that, at least in my lifetime, machines will ever reach. The idea isn't so much. It's based on values that are not perceptible by a machine. Values like morality and altruism, and so on.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think he's right. The better the machines that we have, the better the chance we have of using them properly and well. The flip side of that, of course, think of atomic energy, is that the stuff we create is certainly capable of greater destruction because it's more powerful and more venomous if used negatively.
Yeah. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Oh, um, any idea is good. The old ideas uh, always seem to be always seem to be echoed in the new ideas for me. The older I get, the more been there, done that seems to summarize culture. Whenever someone comes up with a concept in politics or in science, and you say, "Oh, wait a minute, Bacon did that," yeah. I mean, I'm not afraid of ideas. I am afraid of the misuse of ideas,
Yeah.
the abuse of ideas, like Nazism or MAGAism, whatever. The ability to twist evidence to your side without worrying too much about whether or not it's true or accurate.
Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Yes, I can. Uh, as a child, I had eczema. And I remember uh, after, say, 4 or 5 years old, I remember treating it and so on. But my earliest memory is of me putting a salve on I think my neck and laughing with my family at how absurd this was, that I had to hide the redness with the salve. And to me, my earliest memory was of my being embarrassed, or or at least being a negative center of attention. And that always bothered me because I wanted to remember something earlier, more pleasant.
Wow. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Uh, that depends on I mean, I have, as every human being has, good and bad memories. Uh, I think I have a tendency to uh, put the negative memories on a shelf and treasure the good ones. But I know people who are just the opposite, who remember the same situation I do, but remember it more negatively, and I remember it more positively.
Yeah.
So I would say it depends on who you are.
Yeah. Tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model. And what specifically was that impact?
Within the family, I was I was the youngest child, and I was also something always of an outsider uh, because my parents were older, my siblings were older. Uh, they were never really a part of my life. They were too old to be companions or friends. Uh, my father was a very decent person, but a distant father, and never even understood properly what it was I wanted to do. I do remember one time when I told them, I'm going to go to graduate school rather than law school. And to them, this was the kiss of death. I mean, why would I want to do something like teach college when I could be a lawyer and make lots of money? It was incomprehensible to the immigrant experience that I would want to be a scholar. So, no, I don't think I had a model as in the family. In my professional advancement, I had excellent teachers, superb teachers, several of whom became friends. They're all dead now, but they were they proved to me that my decision was the right decision. If you understand what I'm saying,
Oh yeah.
that yeah, that what I did was not only good for me, but it was good in the sense that this was the best use of whatever abilities that I had.
Beautiful. Robert, did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Well, we were nominally Roman Catholic, but uh, no, my father never went to mass. My mother went on holidays only. My grandmother was, you know, hyper religious. Was always in church. I remember one time. Do I don't know if you know what the 40-hour devotion where
Yeah.
you have to be. Someone has to be in the church at all times. Well, my grandmother was there, and she didn't come home, and she was getting very old. And my mother sent me to get my grandmother. She said, so I had to go into a church, get my grandmother, say, go home, and I had to wait for somebody to come in. And I said, I said, I was I was maybe 12 years old. I said, this is ridiculous. I mean, this is just silly. So my um, atheism began at a very early age, but it wasn't a nasty atheism. I hate the Catholic Church or I
Right.
hate religion. It was, this is silly. This is childish.
Yeah.
This is not the way adults should behave. I have to move because my battery is low. Just take me a second to
Oh,
relocate.
sure. No problem.
Uh, no, we can continue. I've got to plug in.
Robert, do you pray?
No,
If
nope.
God exists,
Mhm.
what would you like to say to you after you die?
You know what? My favorite answer to that is the one that Bertrand Russell gave.
Oh, hold on again. We got to go back a little because we missed you. If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Okay, my favorite answer to that is what Bertrand Russell said. Uh, and a woman asked him, "What would you say to God if you're an atheist and you believe that when you die, it's all over? What would you say to God if you woke up and there he was?" And
Yeah,
Bertrand Russell said, "God, you gave me insufficient evidence."
that's good. Insignificant evidence. um.
Insufficient.
Oh,
Uh,
Yeah,
I may have said insignificant, but I meant insufficient.
yeah. That's good. Um. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
No, I think that there are really evil people, sociopaths who, if by evil you mean someone who would do bad things to other people without reason, yes, they exist. Uh,
Yeah.
they don't. They're not necessarily quote unquote responsible for what they do because their brains are wired in a very perverse way. But yes, they do exist.
Um. The real hidden question here, though, really, Robert, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
If your enemy is a hidden enemy, that's true. But if your enemy is a, a country or a political party or a gang that exists in the real world, you're not giving it power by acknowledging it because it's there and people can see and acknowledge it. If if you have a hidden enemy, excuse me, then yeah, that makes sense. You're better off fighting it if it doesn't know you're fighting it.
Right. It's also Nassim Taleb. And Robert, I was just going to suggest tilt your picture a little so we get your, if you can. Yeah,
Just, ugh, I can't do the. Okay, how's this? Better?
that's a better. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. So Nassim Taleb said games were created to give non heroes the illusion of winning. In
Hmm.
real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. And villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. And one more, Gregory Bateson, the anthropologist, says if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, I did something morally and socially wrong? Again, it's a lot of prompts, but the basic question is, does punishment work?
Uh, I don't believe negative reinforcement works in general. I always use the analogy when you're playing a piano and they're studying a piece and you make a mistake, do not continue to make that mistake because then it's imprinted on your conscience. So, no, I don't. I don't think punishment works. I think rather than punishing, well, sometimes you have to punish someone who commits an egregious crime, but rather than punishment as a means of dealing with, look at this. Our country has the largest prison population in the world. I mean, is this consonant with the principles of American freedom? It's a contradiction
Yeah.
of in term. In other words, we did not do the job correctly in making these people happy and prosperous enough to live honest, good lives. The fault is in not, you know, as any good doctor will tell you, prevention is worth 90% of medicine is in healing something that could have been prevented by 10% of prevention, which comes again back to uh, what are the principles you vote for in a candidate. And to me, it's someone who's got at his or her heart the Commonwealth benefit rather than a particular party's slant or a particular position on a certain issue. So, as a, I think our prison system proves that punishment doesn't work.
Yeah. Well put. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate? Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, this is a question in one form or another. My best students always ask me, why the hell should we study literature? What's in it? And my answer always was, they put it in a way that makes it clearer, more powerful, and potentially more able to be acted upon. Uh,
Yeah.
well, there was something. It flew away. I had another anecdote about that. But I think people like art, love art, treasure art. I don't mean just literature, art. If any, not because it's false or because it's fabricated, but because it does the job of communicating with both beauty and truth.
Yeah. No, that's really good. And I'm just going to give you two art quotes just for your sort of the other side. Mike Kelly said, "Art is making your problems other people's problems." What do you
Oh,
think? What do you think of that line?
I agree. Yeah, I mean, if we if we can't be in some way empathetic with those we don't know, but who are different from us, then democracy fails.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very good. Most people can't handle Mike's quote. And then there's poet Fanny Howe. The point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't.
uh, that to me is a little too clever by half. I mean, it, yeah, that would be true of Greek tragedy, but but, but it certainly wouldn't be true of a wild comedy.
Yeah. Too clever. I like that. Too clever. That's poetry for you, Fanny Howe. So Robert, walk us through just briefly your callings in life to be a writer and a educator. Where was that tipping point in high school or college where you go, that's what I want to do? Like you talked about it before when your parents were saying you should be a lawyer and you, but where is that tipping point where you say, that's what I want to pursue?
Okay, I went to a parochial high school in New York. It was an excellent school. Actually, it was considered for a long time the best high school in the city of New York. It was called Regis, and it was run by Jesuits. And the Jesuits, among other things, taught me that uh, it was far better to work out a program of action than it was to dissect ideas in prose or in the Bible or any other place you encountered them. My favorite formulation was by I was a junior in high school, so say I was around 16 years old, uh, and I was learning Latin and Greek. And he said to me, he's a priest. He said to me, "Forget dogma, forget ritual, just do good."
Wow.
And I said, this is coming from a priest. This is and he's saying nothing. It doesn't matter uh, unless it's convertible to useful action and good action. Uh, there's a. Um, I remember. I don't know. I don't even know the source, but a preacher, 17th century England, I'm going to say, who said, "I love this. For the Lord ever loveth adverbs, because for he careth less how good than how well."
Yeah.
So my tipping point was, here was someone who was responsible for my education. I mean, not him himself, but in in, in person, an educator who is telling me that the object of my education should be to live a better life and to be able to convey this to other people rather than to make money or to be successful or rich or any of the other things that people aim to be. And that really tipped me away from being this kind of hermetic scholar that it seemed as if I was going to be, into someone who was going to be a confrontational teacher.
Hmm. Good. What an inspiration. So I'm curious, a screenwriting teacher. Oh, let's do this one first. Sorry. This is McLuhan in 57. It's misleading to suppose there's any basic difference between education and entertainment. The distinction merely relieves people the responsibility of looking into the matter. It's like setting up a distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the ground that one teaches and the other one pleases. However, it's always been true that whatever pleases teaches more effectively. I love your cracking up because that's what McLuhan's thing was all about, making people smile and laugh. But
Yeah.
it's really this last, your thoughts on the distinction between education and entertainment, and mainly this last line. It's always been true that whatever pleases teaches more effectively. Any thoughts on that?
Generally, I think that's true. The a good example, for instance, to me, is Shakespeare, who is the preeminent English poet. But he was also a theater person, a very practical person, and someone who knew that if he wanted to make a point, he had to make it entertaining to the people in the pit. In other words, however magnificent his language was, if it wasn't accessible to ordinary people, it would not not serve the purpose for which he intended. So when you get uh, one of his great history plays or tragedies in particular, their effect is because you are consumed by the brilliance of the language and on stage by the production. Anyone who's ever tried just to read Shakespeare will be aware of the difference between something that pleases and something that just has context.
Yeah.
You have to see it. And by seeing it, whether it's a motion picture or on, I mean, I live in New York City, and for me, live performance of any kind is what I live for, to the theater and concerts and so on. That seeing people embody these words uh, makes them far more powerful and meaningful.
Yes. Theater over film, you're saying.
For me,
Yeah, I
I mean,
understand. That's good. But it's funny because I'm curious how you learned how to make learning a pleasing experience. I mean, the Jesuits, are they slapping your hand with a ruler, go learn this, or they taught you? How did you learn to become a great professor? Was that part of the learning process, or you learned by seeing your other professors do it? Or the
well,
teacher?
I was very fortunate. As I said earlier, I was very fortunate in my teachers. I had from the very beginning, from high school through university, I had teachers who were able to explain and introduce without making it any a kind of torture, which
Yeah.
it can be. Any education can be a form of an ordeal you go through. It's like you want a union card. Well, go to 4 years of college and you got a union card. But meanwhile, you weren't happy in the classroom. You weren't enjoying it. You weren't really learning anything. So uh, I always thought from my high school experiences and later at the university, I always thought that if I could reach my students in a way to make them appreciate what is so special about this, but also what is also so universal about this, then
Yeah.
I'm doing two things for them.
Yeah.
I'm raising their aesthetic sensibilities, but I'm also giving them an opportunity to open up to a larger set of experiences and impressions.
Robert, this is amazing because a screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process as an educator, as a writer?
Oh, intent. Well, as an educator, in the classroom, the my intent is to take a set of a branch of literature, say, how am I going to make this both accessible and meaningful to the students? And the intent is to give it as much, to make it meaningful to them in terms that they can understand. This, we were talking earlier about accommodating language.
Yeah.
You can't say, okay, we're going to do Greek tragedy today, and Greek tragedy is really great. I mean, it's really marvelous, and it is, and and it's marvelous because blah 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 blah. Well, wait a minute. Why is blah 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 important? Why are you going in that direction? You could just see the nodding off immediately. If you say what happens to a person in a Greek tragedy is something that can happen to anybody at any time.
Yeah.
And the consequences of what can happen to any person at any time, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in or who you know. So the intent is always to make this work both shine in its place in history, but also echo to the experience of the student.
Yeah. And then the same question in writing your book, say on Moondog, what role did intention play in your creative process there?
You know, I was very lucky in several respects. Moondog's life falls into three beautifully organized segments so that I didn't have to organize in a sense. It had to be told in this way because that's the way it unfolded. So I said, well, how am I going to make this the kind of book where somebody reading will say, "Oh, I want to continue. I want to go on. I want to find out why is this guy interesting or important." So my first device was to start with a scene of Moondog on the streets of New York. What a day would be like for him. And imagine, I'm blind. I'm filled with all of these musical and poetic ideas, but nonetheless, I'm making my living by selling my wares on the streets, which is what he did for decades. So, by creating a dramatic scene of him in action as an adult, and then going back and explaining how he got to that point, and then going forward and explaining what he made of his life afterwards, I thought I had created a dynamic structure that would uh, move the people reading it to want to find out more about him.
In
So
the Oh, go ahead.
no, that's
Well, we'll get back to Moondog's book too. I'm very intrigued. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your students' needs, your students in general, when you're teaching them? And how much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing your book?
all the time, always.
Yeah.
I I learned from my first classroom experiences as a teacher that what I wanted to get out of the lesson was irrelevant. I want them to understand
Yeah.
this. Okay. Well, that's imposing my will on the material. How dare I? What arrogance. The material ought to be able to impose its will on the person reading it or experiencing it.
Yeah.
And I should be the vehicle through which this occurs.
Yeah.
And the same is true in the book. That uh, uh, you, I don't think I'm present ever
Yeah.
in the biography. I don't. I have marvelous stuff that I could have included. In fact, the editor told me, "I love it, but you're overburdened. You're just overdoing it." In which I interacted with him, or I discovered things, but I left them out of the book because the reader justifiably would say, "Now that is an attempt to manipulate me."
Yeah. Beautiful. Uh, we're going to get into that, what you just said, but this is Leonard Cohen. The only way you can sell a concert is to put yourself at risk. And if you don't do that, people know. What role does risk play in your creative process?
That's very good. I like that. I'd never heard that before. Yes, you when you write, you're you're out there. You're vulnerable. Anybody at any time could pick it up and start hating you for for a variety of reasons. So when when I was writing the Moondog, I was saying, okay, what would the reader think at this point about this particular opinion? For instance, I made a point at several instances. I kind of philosophized, and I said, okay, it's very easy to see that Moondog at this point was edible, the classic sense. He was rebelling against his father. He was assuming an independence. And another point, I said, well, the '60s mean something very different to those who didn't live through them than for those who did. And
Yeah.
they have an aura, a kind of mystique of being the '60s and the early '70s, of being a time of just opening out and possibility and 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 freedom of unattached to a great deal of the detritus of the past. Well, I said that's only one way of looking at it. When if you lived through this time, it was also a frightening period of time. I mean, people were being assassinated. We were in the worst war we've ever been in, doing things that should have landed us at the Hague Court for.
Hello.
Yeah,
Yes.
but it achieves a certain kind of aura which is based on a, a, a blindness and an ignorance rather than an immersion. And I wanted to make it clear that Moondog lived through a period of time that for him was very different from what our nostalgia created for us. And I was kind of challenging the reader to say, put yourself in that position and see how wonderful this time was. So yeah, I think risking is necessary in order to achieve an end, and I think
Yeah.
that's what he meant by you'll never get him. If a singer is only singing half-assed, the audience is going to know it.
Yep.
Uh, and if a writer is afraid to explore the full parameters of a subject, well, then the reader is going to know that it is kind of cowardice.
It's amazing, Robert. No one's analyzed that Cohen so deeply, and I appreciate that because here's the other follow-up is Viola Spolin, a social worker in Chicago who did role-playing exercises and kind of invented comedy improv for like the Groundlings in Second City. And she said, if the audience cannot see your struggle to achieve something, they cannot root for you to achieve it. What role does struggle play in your creative process?
I'm going to answer. I'll get to the answer, I think, but I want to give an analogy. Um, I saw a production of Macbeth, brilliant production, and on the stage, a scene that in most productions I'd ever seen was almost like play acting. It's when Macduff finds out that his children and his wife have been murdered by Macbeth. They give him the news, and you know what it's like on stage. There was a full minute, where he did nothing. Now, that minute was more meaningful to me than any number of words that could have been said, alas and woe, because you could feel by that silence what was going through this man's mind. He had just lost his family. Well, if you're a writer and you can't get through a particular logjam that you encounter, how am I going to do this? It is a struggle, and it is a struggle because you're not only looking for the right words, you're looking for the right methodology to get through this period of time. And that, I think, will be reflected in what you actually write. That the reader will see that this is not simplistic or reductive, that this is a complex thing that isn't necessarily resolvable, but has to be at least understood in all its complexity. That's a struggle.
It's amazing. My wife's a pro jazz singer, and sometimes she'll forget the words, and she'll literally hit her face like, "Oh, I." Now most people don't know that she messed up the words.
Right.
She could go, "I'm going to just cover it up," like Miles taught Herbie Hancock. Just work the mistake in and don't make a big issue of it. But she brings it to the attention, and then maybe that makes it more enduring. The way I psychoanalyze, I say, yeah, people go, "You mean I paid bucks to see you and you're making a mistake? You're human."
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I one time heard Rostropovich play Bach's cello suites, which are the hardest. I'm not a professional musician, but apparently the most difficult thing ever written for a cello. And he was the preeminent cellist at that time. This is going back decades. And he made mistakes.
Yeah.
You could hear the mistakes that he made. And you could see that the mistakes were made by the fucking struggle that he was doing to, to get all of the elements to work at a particular time. And you loved it. I mean, you can't get any better than him. You can't get any better music than this. And yet, it is a flawed experience because it's two human beings, a composer and a performer, who are encountering something that is so difficult and so challenging that mistake is almost inevitable.
And there's a word you've used several times and made it more universally, like, I don't know if it's appealing, but it made it universal to the listener and the player that this is we're risking by doing this live. I could go to the studio like Glenn Gould eventually figured, and I can fix every little mistake by editing, but I'm going to do this live. So it's a living, breathing organism. Which is, I basically think I want to go into music with you, but one little answer was, I think when we recorded music, we ruined a word used, the ritual of music. Music is a live event. Tom Waits said the best music doesn't want to be recorded, but it's not that it ruined it. It just changed it. But now we don't, celebrate the live music event as much because we go, oh, I can watch on YouTube in 2 minutes, or, I don't have to drive and park and go to the concert. I can watch it and,
Yeah. And what's this sound like on YouTube? It's awful. Again, I have some fabulous recordings of the music that I love and listen to it all the time, but nothing beats watching these people do it
Yeah.
on stage. Uh, I tease my wife. I said, all of my money is spent on live events, and all of my excess money for entertainment is spent on live events. And I, I mean, I can give you hundreds of examples, but one I'll never forget. Uh, I saw Uncle Vanya uh, at Circle in the Square when they had just moved from Bleecker Street to the theater district, and it was George C. Scott, Nicole Williamson, and what was it? Julie Christie.
Wow.
And I'm sitting in it's theater in the round, so I'm sitting in the first row, and these people are walking right by me, feet away from me. I never for a moment thought I was watching a play. I was seeing people.
Yeah.
I was, yes, there's a script. Yes, they were doing the lines. Yes, Chekhov had written this and they were doing Chekhov. But you were watching human beings go through the action in a way that made it experience and just uh, 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 not just a work of art. Uh,
Yeah.
that was one of the earliest plays I ever saw, and I was smitten. And I said, I will. I ran a theater program at the university for many years, and in it, I would have the students go to see a play, and then the players come to school and deconstruct what they saw for
Yeah.
them to see how they put together these words in a certain way as to make it an experience that was lifelike, and not just something flat on the page. So yeah, I mean, unless you unless you can act. I mean, again, living in New York, we're very lucky. We could see a different play every night, literally, and
Yeah.
and you could see a different concert every night, literally. So there's no shortage of doing what I like the most. Uh, but if anybody has the opportunity to see live music or live theater, uh, nothing beats it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I wanted to go back for a second because when you talked about that full minute of silence, it reminded me of Thelonious Monk saying, "The silence is the loudest sound in the universe."
Hmm. Yeah.
So, Robert, I asked for 90 minutes and we got about 15 more minutes, but I was wondering maybe we can do a part two because I'd really love to go into music and Moondog. But maybe we could shift into James Joyce a little because being a friend of John Gordon and him being one of the preeminent Joyceans, I'm curious if you have a relationship with Joyce, especially because reading Finnegan's Wake out loud is, for me, a living organism. And I found that, this is how you do this. There's other Joyce. And I was curious if you did, through your relationship with John, delve into Joyce, or if that's not really part of your repertoire as James Joyce.
Well, the Finnegan's Wake group, of which John and I are part, we've been at it now. It's over 10 years, and we're reaching the end. We're about 20 pages from the end, uh, and to me, it has always been primarily a linguistic experience. I mean,
Yeah,
it's Joyce making the language into something that it wasn't before, and
yeah,
that's what counts the most. The plot is pretty silly. The
yeah,
and the And the reference, there are some lots of references to things like Irish current events or Irish mythology and other things that, yeah, who cares? I'm very interested in what he's doing to build complex language
Yeah.
that is infinitely suggestible. John, of course, is knows the damn thing inside out,
Right.
and can. I mean, he's. I always say you've got to read because he reads it as if he understands it, and I know that sounds silly, but it's true.
Yeah.
You can read a sentence in Finnegan's Wake and say, "What the hell have I just read?"
Yeah.
You know, you've got to go back and look. He reads as if he understands it, and he does. So that makes my job a lot easier because now all I have to do is deal with the language and not worry about the story, not worry about the intent of this story or any of that.
Yeah.
So we work. We have a complementary relationship, John and I, and uh, he's delightful, and he's so damn good at just about every aspect of it. But I love to give him at least one surprise. You know, it's a, I my aim in life. One of my aims in life is to make John Gordon know something he didn't before. And
Wow. That is happy. This is really beautiful. So, but let's go back to your relationship with Joyce previous. Like you're like me. I mean, to me, Joyce is the wake. And now I'm in a Ulysses group, but I can't get into Ulysses like I did the wake. So I started Joyce basically at the wake. And I'm just curious your history. Did you read him in high school or college for school or for on your own? And then at 10 years ago, what was that tipping point where you did John go, why don't you be in this wake group with me? So like just sort of that relationship,
ah,
your
okay,
history of your relationship with Joyce first. Yeah.
okay. My history with Joyce is in graduate school. I changed from a major in comparative literature to English literature because I wanted to write about Joyce, and I did in my dissertation. But I did in my dissertation, I only used the portrait of the artist, and it was part of a panorama of certain kinds of books. He was the last in a series of experiments in a portrait.
Yeah.
So my knowledge of Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake came later.
Yeah.
When I we started the Finnegan's Wake group 10 years ago, John wasn't part of it. John came later, and boy, we were happy to get him because there were a couple of there were a couple of months there where we were just foundering because people were dropping like flies. And one of the reasons was that they were not able to deal with context, which never interested me at all. Again, I was immersed in the language. Uh, I knew Latin, knew Greek, and so on, and I was so interested in seeing how he, this word in Latin means this, but in Greek it means this,
Yeah.
and the way he put this word together, he knew both.
Yeah.
So anyway, uh, and so John kind of gave us a great a resurrection and interest uh, because he was able to put everything in a context of a story, of a narrative. I mean, one of his books is is a plot summary of Finnegan's Wake. So we were very fortunate to get him, and we were happy to have him, and he's delightful. But we started without him because we just wanted to do it. Just a bunch of people, and we an enormous. It's just a total heterogeneous group. Very few of us are scholars or academics. John and I think there's one other who we're all retired now, but who were academics. The rest of us are not are from all walks of life,
How
policemen. And
how many years has John been in the group?
I think he's been in for at least 5 or 6 of the 10.
And what is what is it called? Is it an open Finnegan's Wake meeting, or is it just for you and a few people? What do you call your group?
We don't have a name. We started in a restaurant in my neighborhood in the West Village, uh, over 10 years ago, and then finally, and then my wife was so good enough. She says, "Well, why don't you bring him here?" So for many years before COVID, we met in our house, in our apartment, and all we knew at some point we had as many as 12 people, but we never had a name. We weren't the something. We was reading Finnegan's Wake.
Right.
Uh,
That's
uh,
cool.
yeah.
Because you know of Murray's group, or the Gotham book group, or James Joyce Society in New York, or
Oh,
Finnegan's Wake.
sure,
You know
sure.
about all those. Okay.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, I published a couple of articles in the James Joyce Quarterly, and
yeah,
the Gotham Bookmark was where the James Joyce Quarterly was its
yeah,
headquarters in New York. Yeah.
good. So let's go into that for a little. What's your take on Joyce's line, epiphanies and everydayness? What does that mean to you?
Well, Epiphany is it's the feast of the Revelation, and that's what Epiphany means in Greek, is a revelation. And what he meant by a revelation, by an epiphany, was a sudden realization that someone gets. It's not a literary technique. It's a plot device. It's something that happens in the character. All of a sudden, the character has this revelation, and he said something like, I forget where, in a letter or what, he said, if you can get these revelations down, if you can manage them in in the story in a believable way, you'll get a lot closer to what life is like for most people. So yeah, I mean, it is. The epiphany comes not out of literature and not out of art. It comes from an everyday experience. So uh, what would be an epiphany that I could call? Oh, in a portrait of the artist, for instance, Stephen is walking on the beach, and all of a sudden he sees this young girl in the surf and the water coming in and ruffling her dress, and he says, "What? That's what I want to do. I want to be able to tell everybody what it was like to experience this moment of beauty."
Yeah, it's really good. You suss that out better than anyone's ever done it. So I'm going to ask you a weight question. We'll go into portrait a little. The weight question's kind of stupid. How much percent? But I mean, I'm asking you to be honest. How much percentage do you get the wake, and how much percentage did Joyce get the wake? Just in general, from 100% being the best.
Okay, well, I mean, he got it. I have no doubt. Uh, After studying very closely Ulysses and then the Wake, the man knew what he was doing and had full command of so many different languages and so many different cultures that by and large he was in control. He understood what he was doing. And when you, as I said, when you take apart any one of his more elaborate puns or play on words, you realize that they're not only contextually good and precise, but they also are rich in history. I mean, he knew what he was about. So I would give Joyce a 90%.
Very good. Now yourself.
Oh, on a good day, maybe 20, 30%. And that's really overstressing it. it. The thing about getting Joyce, which always amused me, you're not going to get Joyce. You're going to get a part of. You're going to get a little of Joyce. You're going to get whatever you managed to eke out at any given moment. So I understand that
Yeah.
that my under, I understand that what I just read, I got a certain amount out of and understood it. Sometimes, I mean, we'll get a passage where I'm pretty sure I got most of it.
Yeah.
And then they will get another pad. There was a couple a few weeks ago. Even John said, "I don't. What the hell is he doing here?" So, so you know,
That's good.
Yeah,
That's good, Robert, because it's like where the hand of man never set foot. That's like an advertising slogan, man. We
yeah.
get that, and this is the other one from Elman. I'm curious. And before we get into the portrait quotes, can you go a little longer now?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is Elman said James Joyce's we're learning to be Joyce's contemporaries. So that is like, Joyce also has this thing about all times are happening now. All at onceness.
Mm-hmm.
So you can talk about, what do you think Elman's saying? We're learning to be Joyce's contemporaries, that all times are happening now, or we're learning to be living in Joyce's time? Because we know, I mean, we read email and we read these words in the wake, and it's like, well, is he being predictive? And I think John is one of those there's several Joyce scholars that think, no, he's not being predictive, but you can look into it both ways if you like. So any thoughts on this question of time, especially in regards to Elman's line, we're learning to be Joyce's contemporaries?
I'm going to answer by another analogy.
Yes.
Throughout the Middle Ages, people would open up Virgil's Aeneid and then point to a line. Augustine did this in his Confessions. Point to a line, and then take that as a prophecy. You can do this with any great writer because any line of a great writer is loaded with potential.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, Joyce is totally human in every respect except his ability to handle language. And I don't think there's anything prophetic at all about Finnegan's Wake or anything Joyce read, except that he, in Ulysses in particular, he saw more deeply into the dailiness of life than any writer ever did, and therefore saw significance in things that other writers had missed. Finnegan's Wake is a tour de force. It's something that's meant to keep you busy throughout your life without necessarily settling on a particular interpretation, because in my opinion, there is no interpretation. There is no meaning to Finnegan's Wake other than the experience of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why I would say, Robert, when you say you get it 20-30%, I always say, people, you're like me, we get it 80% because we're continuing to read it for 10 years. My group's met for 29 years. I mean, the fact that you're hanging in there means you're getting it, because you wouldn't abandon if you were just getting it 20%. But the words "get it" can be interpreted different ways. So
Right.
this is amazing what you saw into the dailiness of life. That flipped your answer for number 2, flipped back into number 1, epiphanies and everydayness. But it's a sudden it's a plot device. That's the most amazing thing. It's a plot device. That's what epiphanies and everyday.
I know. Joyceans are going to burn me at the stake for that.
I love it. No, we do not burn at the stake. We have the Joyceans are about having fun fun for all.
Right. If you can't enjoy it, why bother?
Yeah. And that's it.
There's no,
Mostly. you're just laughing and having a good time. But my friend who taught me this says, when you're laughing, you're learning.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, definitely.
So here's portrait. I will try to express myself in some mode of life or art as freely as I can and as wholly as I can, using for my defense the only arms I allow myself to use: silence, exile, and cunning. What
Hmm.
do those three words mean? Silence, exile, and cunning.
Well, I can't think of three words more often used by writers than those three. Uh,
Yeah,
uh, 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 First of all, Joyce, we have but not everybody does, that everything Joyce wrote was about Ireland, and nearly everything that he wrote about Ireland, he wrote outside of Ireland. So, so, so the exile, he was a voluntary exile from the only source of material he ever wrote about.
yeah,
Silence, in the sense that he was, I think he meant, just not getting involved in any struggles back there, or because when Stephen speaks it, he's actually in Dublin. That I'm not going to get involved in any of this stuff because I'm going into exile, and this is a strategy, a cunning. The word "cun" in Old English means strategy. It's a strategy for the artist to deal with his material, because the only way he could actually deal with it objectively is to deal with it from afar. So I I know I met Don DeLillo once, and he told me that was his strategy. You know, you you Don DeLillo is available. You can find him, but nobody does because he's
yeah.
he's he's doing what he's doing. I know Pynchon lives a couple of miles away from me, but I don't know where, and I'm certainly not going to bother him. So great writers, seriously great writers, have to have their material, but not necessarily directly experienced, because to experience it directly is to get involved in it, and the great writer can't get involved with it because then he won't write.
Well, that's like the difference between the writing teacher who says, write what you know, and then the writing teacher who says, well, use your imagination and make stuff up. Is that
Right.
what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Right. Yeah. Which, right. I mean, Bloom is not a real person. Yet, has there ever been a person more fully realized than Leopold Bloom?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, he created him whole cloth out of a number of previous experiences, but he created him wholly out of his imagination. But his imagination created a real person, and not some figment. We use the term figment of imagination. You'll never use I can't use the word figment with Joyce, because everything he does is so fully realized, so completely uh, finished, uh, as Leopold Bloom, as is the Dublin. I mean, has ever a city been a character so vivid as Dublin in Joyce?
Wow. You touched on so much there, and I want to go into this idea of the fasting, doing without, in a second. But first, I always say DeLello and Pynchon, Gaddis, they're all uh, Finnegan's Wake wannabes.
Well, they all, to some degree or another, acknowledge who the master is,
Yeah,
and that I mean, they're original. All three of those are extremely original writers,
yeah,
who took, who went their own way, who didn't do Joyce's over again, but Joyce liberated them in the sense that he showed it was possible in language to do anything. Think of what Pynchon did for World War II.
Yeah.
He reimagined World War II.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, so yeah, I mean, they all know who the master is. I don't think a writer alive after, say, 19. I'm just using
Yeah.
after World War II. Say, no writer after World War II of any serious merit in English could possibly ignore Joyce.
You know, Robert, it's like T.S. Eliot saying the mature poet steals, the immature poet imitates. But that, you know, they just found out that Yip Harburg and Arlen kind of might have heard this song. Have you heard this? It just written up in the Hollywood Reporter a couple weeks ago. They heard this song, and that's where they got Over the Rainbow from. Maybe, or it's coincidence, but you can hear this old song, and it's like, hey, that's over somewhere over the rainbow. You know, Yip Harburg and Harlan were pretty good songwriters. They weren't ripping people off blatantly, but you know how it's in Michael Feinstein in the article says plagiarism is copying without inspiration, and inspiration is plagiarism without getting caught.
Yeah. Well, sure. I mean, uh, I, I can't think of. I'm trying to think of uh, what Joyce does with the Odyssey. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not only a reimagining of the Odyssey. It's making the Odyssey into something that's in the 20th century. Maybe
Yeah.
that's what Ellman was after. Uh, that when you write about living in a city, uh, you kind of have to be thinking of Ulysses. When
Yeah.
you're writing about dream states, you kind of have to be thinking of Finnegan's Wake and so on. So
Yeah.
I think that may be what Ellman was saying.
I think you're right. Dream states, that's good. And that's the wake. So this is McLuhan talked about this, you know, you can't the fish don't know they're in water unless you take them out of the water, you know,
Right.
and this thing about fasting, is that what you were touching on, that you got to do without something to understand how it affects you, and that's why we fast. We try to be without something. Like if everyone would fast from their cell phone for one day, and then everybody would have a big meeting and say, well, what happened? But you know, it's just like when people turn off the TV for a week or whatever. This idea of fasting, doing without, it's back to your idea of silence in a play. When all of a sudden you have silence, or in music, the dynamics of silence.
You know, people are uncomfortable with silence. Even
Yeah.
even that one moment in Macbeth, I could see people wondering what's gone wrong.
Yeah.
You know, what's wrong? Did the sound go? Did he
Yeah.
have a stroke? They don't that they didn't understand that this person had just had the greatest possible trauma a human being can have.
Yeah.
And they expect him to speak eloquently in Shakespearean couplets. You know, uh, it's astonishing how when we go to a concert or a play, we never take a cell phone. We never
Yeah.
take it.
Yeah.
And I forget about turning it on. We never take it. And the
Yeah.
reason I tell anybody is I'm more interested in seeing what people are doing and watching the orchestra set up.
Yeah.
How are they going to set up? How are they going to put? Are they going to have first violins here?
Yeah.
I'm interested in seeing the set of a play, the actual
Oh yeah.
stage, and because I know pretty soon people are going to be in it. So,
Yep.
so that's to me far more important than checking my email, which can wait until I get home,
Yeah.
or even worse, to engage in inane conversation with someone, which all of, and by the way, this is not children. These are old people who are doing this.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, I mean,
Now,
yeah.
yeah. Hello. Yeah, it's a huge addiction. Well, we mutated. Anyways, this is funny because I didn't ask you this. I want to go back. McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanism. In fact, he says technology is the most human thing, meaning spoken word, printed word, cell phones, toothpicks, everything we invent is, it's a different kind of wordage that he uses, that technology media is anything humans invent, whether it's tangible or not. And so, knife and fork, he says he learned this from Finnegan's Wake. Knife and fork extends our teeth. The shutter in a camera extends our eyelid. And maybe philosophy or religion extends consciousness, non tangible. What does the writing utensil extend for you? Whether it's a keyboard or a pen, what humanness does it extend?
Well, since Moondog, the only thing I've written is poetry. I've published a couple of volumes of poems. Uh, I don't take myself seriously as a poet. I write poems. But to me, the poem is a self-contained statement about a moment in time or a position or an idea, and that the implement that I use, whether it's a pencil or keyboard, uh, is not as important as the fact that this statement is being made by a person for other people. Uh, and this is part of the problem with technology with me, its misuse, is that it isn't for people to connect with other people. It's for people to share
Yeah.
experiences that they weren't involved in.
Yeah.
I mean, I see young girls giggling at cat videos at as
Yeah.
they're sitting and having dinner, saying, "But you're with people. There are other people at this table, you know, and they're sharing it. They're turning around there, and the, this can be done at any time, any place. But you're with human beings,
Yeah.
and I miss ever since COVID. What I miss is having these groups in my house."
Yeah.
Because there's nothing like when you're discussing anything, discussing it face to face with other people. On Zoom, no matter how well it's done, there's always going to be all kinds of collisions of time and space, which don't occur when people interact face to face. The transitions and the interpolations are very smooth. They're,
Yeah.
they're part of the intercourse. Uh, Whereas online, it always seems somewhat false and um, not false. That's the wrong word. It always seems put together in a way that is not emotionally satisfying.
Yeah. It's good, Robert. You're a wordsmith. I've been learning a lot, and it's also reminding me of. It's like there these. You were saying these people sharing cat videos. It's like they're carrying around a campfire. Like, here, look at my campfire for a few
Right.
seconds. My friend who worked with Norman Mailer, she says in the old days, if you were talking on the phone and there was silence, you couldn't handle it. You go, "Are you still there? Did
You're
we
right.
get
Of course.
disconnected?" But now people answer on the cell phone and they go, "Where are you?" They don't know. It's not the silence, it's the place. And now you don't even have to know. You probably can push a button and they'll tell you, "I am here." You don't even have to ask the question. The two things, or the one thing you really evoked was Jean Rouch, the great French documentarian and film theorist. He said, "When I put a camera between me and you, it's more real than without a camera." So that seems the opposite. But he's saying, just like when you put spoken word between me and you, or your people in your living room, your students or whoever. It's more real because it's why do we invent these things? Because we want to share them with other human beings. I mean, that's what I think. What I got from what does the writing utensil extend for you? What I got, and you tell me if this is what you meant, was sharing humanness.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
What else? What other reason other than confiding to my dear diary? What other reason would you write? Is to convey something to someone else
yeah,
at a distance,
yeah,
because ideally, if there were only three people in the world, we wouldn't need writing. We would just be able to talk among one another. But you write so that you reach another human being and say, look, this is my world, welcome to it. you
yeah,
know uh sure, communication.
yeah. So, Robert, I was wondering if we could do this. I'll close out with one more question, which could go on for 15 minutes with you. This is amazing. And then we plan a part two, like 4 or 6 months down the line, where we can really delve into music and Moondog and some more Joyce, if that's
For
okay with
sure.
you. Okay. So, Robert, this is about the word archive.
Mm.
1400 etymologically, it means keep safe, free from harm. 200 years later, it's what we think of it as a record preserved as evidence. But the basic two questions is archiving more innate or more invented? And do you have plans for your own archive? But I'm going to suss it out a bigger picture with a few more quotes. This is Charles Baudelaire. If you try to make a statement long, deep, and rich, it will age very fast. If you try to only own the day you're talking, it will last forever. So, why do we humans feel we have to hold on to this stuff when, in essence, the Eastern philosophy teaches us to live in the moment, be here now? So, being in a wake group, yeah, we have this vehicle to gather us together, but we're in this moment reading something aloud, which is an activity you usually don't do when you're reading a book. You don't read a book
Hmm.
aloud with other people. So Joyce flipped it. He turned a eye experience into an ear experience. So also this word archive comes from town hall, public building, the first archon, first ruler, chief magistrate. So just suss out this whole complexity of living in the moment, being here now, and why do we have to save all this stuff?
How would we know how Horace lived in the moment unless he wrote it down? The record we have of the past is a record of Baudelaire's people living in the here and now.
Yeah.
And I certainly want to know the difference, if there's any, between what it was like to live in the here and now then and what it is like to live in the here and now. And also to see how similar they are, because basically, if we were reading, forget what it was, it doesn't matter. We were reading a writer of the 19th century, and there was a passage, a couple of sentences, and I said that could have been written yesterday. There's nothing in those two sentences that's dramatically different from anything you or I could have written about our experience today. And to me, this is one of the great reasons to study literature. You see both the difference and the similarity of human beings through time in a very vivid way by people who are trying to capture that moment for you. Yeah, they're writing it down. So they're obviously writing it for an audience, for readers. And we're the readers.
Amazing. That was really well done. And so, do you think this need or want to archive is more innate or more invented? Like the Egyptians would save stuff in their coffin with them.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the way it has evolved that we treasure the genius of the past in by saving it rather than by just letting it lapse. That I think I almost want to trace it to the library in Alexandria,
Yeah.
where everything was gathered at one place, you know, and everything from a whole bunch of different cultures, and the idea was it was possible to have it in one place at one time the very best that human beings had written over the past 1,000 years. Let's say it was a couple of hundred years BC when it was first found, the library. Uh, from that point on, it's been imperative for people to preserve the past in some kind of permanent form, whether it's print. I mean, to me, the greatest invention ever in the history of the human race is the book.
Yeah.
I mean,
Agreed.
nothing comes close.
Nothing. Mallarmé said everything ends up in a book.
Yeah, yeah. It's what could possibly beat beat a book as the great invention. So yeah, we have.
But Robert, the question was, is this innate or invented? What do you think?
I
To archive, more innate or more invented?
I think it's more inventive. I can't imagine, how we've been quote unquote civilized for 5,000-6,000 years. Everything a couple of million years before that, there were no archives. One of the things that always amazed me is the fact that when they opened up tombs, they found old people, not kings or queens but just old people being buried with honor. And these were the archives. They were the people who remembered what plant to eat for food and what plant to avoid for poison. The the idea is that what evolved as a survival mechanism became, in our time, a method of preserving the past, not only surviving in the present. I think,
Uh, that is really good. And so, do you have plans for your own archives? If you died, does your wife know what to do with your boxes of notes?
yeah.
And you have a university where it's going to, or a college, or an archive already, or do you have plans for your own archive?
Well, a lot of my stuff is now at Yale. The
I
Moondog
s-
uh, interviews and original materials is at Yale, and my other things are now being scanned, and I'll get them back. And I wanted to have a Moondog Institute at a university, and I had, without belaboring it, created all kinds of interesting ways of doing this at various institutions that were all willing to do it, but there was legal trouble with the material in Germany, and then it just died. So when I get my material back, I'm going to get in touch with the lawyer again in Germany and see if we can get an archive, one there and one here. And then I'll put everything Moondogish there. And the rest of my stuff, my wife and my two children are fully aware of where it is, and including, I'm proud of this. They just translated Moondog into French.
oh, how cool.
Yeah,
Because one thing about digitizing is, don't destroy your master
of
tapes.
course.
You
Yes.
know that. Good.
Yes. Yeah, Moondog's master tapes were lost through absolute, I mean, it's just horrifying how
Yeah.
ridiculous it was. He didn't care. He didn't care
Right.
about anything, no document. He didn't care about tapes, documents, nothing. But the people around him could have done a better job of
Yeah.
preserving. And a lot, most of his master tapes from the 50s are gone.
Yeah.
Just gone.
This is a teaser for part 2 with you, Robert. What an event. Did you meet Moondog?
Oh, yes. When I was in college, my friends and I visited him at his spot at 53rd and Avenue of the Americas, and I still have them, a 78 record and a sheet of his poetry, his couplets. And then I think we went back again a second time. And then I spent 2 weeks in Germany with him when he agreed to be interviewed for the book, and met him a couple of times afterwards. Once in Brooklyn when he came, and once in London when he performed at the proms. So yeah, I mean, I knew him personally. Yes.
Good. Yeah, I was hoping so because I haven't read your book and I want to, but amazing. So we'll go into music in general, Moondog next time, and a little more Joyce. And really been enlightening for me, Robert. Thank you so much for your time and energy.
Oh, you're welcome. I enjoyed it. I really did. There's nothing like a retired professor who can talk about anything, even if he doesn't know what he's talking about.
I think you know what you're talking about. I've learned so much, and even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever. Thank you, Robert.
You're welcome. See you next time.
Okay.